Tony Blair is the longest-serving Labour Prime Minister in British history. Throughout most of those years in power, one man was closer to him than any other. Alastair Campbell was, for 10 years, the other man in the room, privy to Tony Blair's innermost thoughts, ambitions and doubts. He occupied a position of unequalled authority and influence. He kept a diary, recording the good days and the bad, the peaks and troughs of political power.
Together we could change the face of British politics and change the world while we're at it. I'm finished with these people, he said, absolutely finished with them. And then she's standing there, spellbindingly drop-dead gorgeous in a way that millions of photographs didn't quite get. He pushed at me, threw a punch and then another. I grabbed his lapels and Tony was now moving in to separate us.
The sudden death of John Smith left the party stunned and saddened.
It's just heartrending news. It's going to devastate everyone who knew him.
He helped rebuild the party. He brought us to a position where we could have been in power.
Alastair Campbell was then a prominent political journalist with strong Labour connections.
Amid the sadness, I had two very powerful instincts. One, that Tony Blair would be leader. And two, though we had never discussed it, that I would work for him.
Gordon Brown has till now been regarded as Smith's natural successor, but everything changed, and before Brown is persuaded not to run, Blair confides he will.
Tony called, swore me to secrecy and said it was pretty certain now that he would run and GB would not.
Within 24 hours, Blair and Brown's deal was public. What would follow would be more than a decade of not always creative tension right at the very top.
Tony said he really wanted me to do what I could to ensure a soft landing for Gordon.
I think Gordon Brown, in an act which will win him considerable support right across the Labour Party, has certainly secured his own position.
Brown's decision to stand aside was welcomed as honourable and principled, but he suspected Blair allies like Campbell were responsible for manipulating this outcome. Campbell is now playing a dual role as an influential Blair cheerleader and a political commentator. Just a week before the leadership contest, he's on a panel grilling the contenders.
Do you think you were tough enough to cope with the sort of media onslaught that Neil Kinnock, for example, had to endure?
I think it comes with the territory, and I'm entirely prepared for it, indeed expect it.
Campbell is not only Blair's confidant, he's also his unofficial advisor, writing what by now is unquestionably his victory speech to the party.
Tony asked me to go round to Richmond Crescent. He had a strong draft of his acceptance speech, and we went through it, line by line, honing it, trying to make it sing a little more.
And I want to see a community where if it's not good enough for my children, then it's not good enough for theirs and anyone else's in our society.
Blair saw that Campbell knew what made the press tick and could use it to Labour's advantage.
I said I'm not sure I'm suited to it. I've got a big ego of my own and a ferocious temper. I can't stand fools and I don't suffer them. I'm hopeless at biting my tongue. He said, I've thought about that, but I still think you're right for it. I'd also had a serious psychotic breakdown in 1986 and worried that the pressures of the job he was offering might lead me down some very dark and dangerous alleyways. He knew all that and said, I'm not worried if you're not worried. I said, what if I am worried? I'm still not worried, he said. I had my partner Fiona, my parents and many friends including Neil Kinnock pleading with me not to do it. They feared it would take over my life, that I would end up loathing the media. Neil said, "It'll be good for Tony and bad for you and the family. I'm totally opposed. You'll hate the crap, the detail, the w***ers you have to be nice to."
But when Blair said he planned to dump some of Labour's socialist baggage, like its commitment to nationalisation, known as Clause 4, Campbell was hooked.
Bold. I said, "I hope you do, because it's bold." "I will," he said, and he had a real glint in his eye. He asked me to start thinking about how best to express it.
He's begun to make noises during the campaign which suggest that he does want to have a fairly radical rethink of some of Labour's sacred cows.
Whether it was deliberate or not, I don't know. But he found the way to persuade me, and I told him that I would do the job. He said together we could change the face of British politics for a generation and change the world while we're at it. I called Peter Mandelson, who said he was pleased. He said, "I hope we don't fall out," which I thought was a very odd thing to say, but on reflection, maybe not. Tony told me Gordon thought I was hostile to him. I said he shouldn't. When I said after John died that you would be leader, it wasn't a strategic move, it was just pretty obvious to me. Tony said he still believed Gordon was, in many ways, a superior politician. TB said, "You will be a key advisor, answerable only to me, part of the inner team with John Prescott, Gordon Brown and Robin Cook."
Deputy Leader John Prescott's job from the outset was to get the unions and Labour traditionalists on board.
I'd been scribbling some thoughts on a slogan for conference. New Labour, New Britain was the best. Met John and tried out New Labour on him. Not overwhelmed, but not totally hostile. I can't believe we're having a great argument about whether we can stick New Labour on a backdrop. New Labour, New Britain. We're changing the party to show we're fit to be trusted to change the country. It's obvious.
This is not about dumping or ditching. It's about building and creating. It's about making it clear what we actually stand for as a political party, because the people of this country want us to be clear.
But even the architects of New Labour worry that Blair's going too far, too fast.
About an hour and a half sleep. Peter M came round about 7 and said there's a small chance Tony will end up dead in the water as a result of this. Tony asked me what the chances were that he'd be out of a job if he went through with it. I said, about 10%. I walked up with him. "Oh well, here goes," he said, smiled and walked on. There was a ballsiness to his enthusiasm which I liked.
This is a modern party living in an age of change. It requires a modern constitution that says what we are in terms the public cannot misunderstand and the Tories cannot misrepresent.
We just had a declaration of war from Tony Blair, who's told this conference that he wants to ditch socialism, ditch Clause 4, and base the policy of the party on a market economy. In other words, a Tory party Mark II.
But most of the delegates regard Clause 4 as a relic of the past. They see Mr. Blair as the future, and they like what they see.
This, that Tony couldn't have done what he did today without all the love and support he's been given by everybody in this room.
Up early and skimmed through the papers. Took them through to TB and said, "You might as well have a read of them because you will never get a better press than this for a speech." "I know," he said.
While Blair is still basking in the afterglow of his speech, Campbell hears about a Sun exclusive that gets into Blair's personal life.
The editor of The Sun told me they had topless pictures of Cherie's friend Carol Kaplan, and they will publish tomorrow. I got a message to Tony and filled him in when he came off the platform. I said it was probably handleable, but if she was a gold digger or a media plant, heaven knows where this could lead. She and Cherie were obviously friendly, and presumably she'd confided all sorts of things. Tony didn't exactly look happy, but he said he did not believe this would be being done with Carol's knowledge. I spoke to Carol. I said she might as well tell me the truth because we would have to deal with it. I said it would be better for everyone if she left Blackpool.
Cherie was outraged that Carol had been ordered to leave the conference by her husband's press secretary and that he was trying to dictate who her friends could be.
Said to Tony that I understood why Cherie felt angry, but it was important she got from the outset that the honeymoon wouldn't last forever, and Carol had the potential to be a real problem for all of us. Tony told me Cherie had taken a knock re Carol. I had to understand this was all new and difficult for her. She was actually quite shy, and to find that even your friends are being approached and written about, it takes a bit of getting used to. He said again he thought I'd been harsh.
Lack of trust and personal animosity characterised relationships at the top of New Labour. Blair spends time and effort trying to reconcile Brown, Mandelson and Campbell.
TB said he really wanted me to make efforts to get on with Gordon and Peter. He said when he was on the way up, the three of them could not have been closer. I said it doesn't mean you can recapture it now. Anyway, we're all flawed in our own ways, I told him. Tony said the election would largely be fought on tax, trust, the economy, and for all that Gordon can be difficult to work with, he had a great mind and operated at a far more strategic level than anyone else in the shadow cabinet. Re Peter, John Prescott said he could work with him okay, but sometimes he felt Peter almost enjoyed being unpopular, and he certainly enjoyed everyone thinking he was all-powerful.
And though Campbell and Mandelson are old friends, their rivalry over who speaks for Blair leads to bitter disagreements.
I said to Peter he should not be briefing the press on anything to do with Tony or strategy. He said he was not at all sure Tony would agree with that. I said I spent a good deal of my time defending him to his colleagues on the basis that he was no longer all over the press, but it was hard to keep doing that. I told Tony if Peter wasn't reined in and just part of the team, it would be a problem, not just for me but for him as well.
Just 3 months later, this prediction played out all too vividly. The backdrop was the Young Labour conference in Brighton. The confrontation was over Blair's appearance.
I was strongly of the view he should wear a shirt and tie. Peter thought he should wear cords and an open-necked shirt. And Tony and he were continuing this conversation as we were trying to finish the wretched speech. I said to Peter it was another instance of him winding Tony up over total trivia. Peter was on the edge and eventually tipped over. He said, "I'm sick of being rubbished and undermined. I hate it and I want out." "Get out then and we can finish the speech." "That's what you want, isn't it? Me out of the whole operation." He started to leave, then came back over, pushed at me, then threw a punch, then another. I grabbed his lapels and Tony was by now moving in to separate us, and Peter just lunged at him, then looked back at me and shouted, "I hate this, I'm going back to London." I think we both felt a little ashamed we let it get out of hand.
John Prescott also let fly at this conference because he finds out accidentally the event is being spun as the first big test for the party on Clause 4, and he hasn't been consulted.
John not happy, so I went to see him. He said it was a strategic decision and he should be involved in that, not just asked to turn out as a f***ing performing seal at the weekends.
Shortly afterwards, a group of Blair's senior colleagues and advisers gathered at a country house to brainstorm the future for New Labour. Prescott was not invited.
I called Tony to warn him that John knew about the away day yesterday, which was inevitable. That sent him into a gloom. I called John and asked how things were. Bad, he said. I can't see how you can say this is anything other than a deception. That changes things for me. It changes my view of everyone who was there and who didn't think I should be. He sounded as pissed off as I've ever known him.
Blair has put education at the top of his agenda. Equality of choice in schools is a priority. He then causes bitter divisions in the party by choosing a grant-maintained school on the other side of London for his son.
I couldn't see the point of generating all the fuss it would cause. He said they'd decided it was the right school for Ewan and that was that. He felt the public would understand he wanted the best for his kids. He said, I'm not going to sacrifice my kids' education for political correctness. It's not as if it's a private school, for heaven's sake. It's a state comprehensive. Up to a point, I said. I went in to see TB, who was standing stark naked reading the Mail. He said, they hadn't carried our side of the story. There's a surprise.
The position of the party is we're not in favour of grant-maintained schools and the degree of opting out and selectivity that confers.
It was a big dent in the halo, and the press would now feel they could pile in a lot harder. Tony said the problem was that I didn't think his decision was justified. True.
Cherie was furious at the coverage, which gave the impression the decision was almost entirely hers.
She thought I'd also been giving TB too negative a picture of the school because I was personally opposed, and it was actually none of my business. I said it was only my business insofar as Tony expected me to deal with the media and political flack, and I felt it was my job to warn him the flack would be considerable. She said Tony was really upset at the coverage. I said I can't be blamed for that. She seemed to think I had some kind of magical power over the press.
Watch my lips. No selection, either by examination or by interview under a Labour government.
An unequivocal statement of party policy, but it doesn't prevent Shadow Cabinet member Harriet Harman from sending her child to a grammar school.
I exploded and wrote her a letter advising her strongly against. I showed Tony my letter and he said I couldn't send it, but should talk to her instead. I told her however she handled it, she was mad to be doing it, and she should fasten her seatbelt.
Despite the warnings, she went ahead with her plan.
Sam, are you going to resign?
Absolutely not.
We've had thousands of Labour Party members phoning and faxing and sending in letters resigning from the Labour Party. Now, this is something that I think as the Labour leaders have got to recognise.
TB then claimed we had never had a proper discussion about it. I said that was balls. He said, do you ever think you'd be a better leader than me? And I said no, because I lacked his patience. He said the MPs wouldn't mind because I was more in tune with them. Ho ho.
The turmoil in Labour's ranks gave a well-orchestrated Tory party its happiest 15 minutes in the Commons for 3 years.
Right honourable gentleman shouldn't be so sensitive about his difficulties. I just want to be tough on hypocrisy and tough on the causes of hypocrisy.
Tony looked desperate, and JP was grim-faced beside him. The press really smelled blood now and were convinced she would have to quit. I said, no way, end of story. It was depressing though. It's okay to work round the clock and work your balls off for things and people you believe in. I didn't feel like that about Harriet or her decision.
Blair was exasperated by the party's reaction and the demands for Harman to be sacked.
Tony said, if she goes, I honestly believe we become unelectable in the eyes of the public, because they would think we were stark staring mad to allow something like this to become a full-blown crisis. This has got to be seen as a test of our mettle, and it's a test that we have to pass.
From the very beginning, Blair's determination to reform the party has been a do-or-die crusade.
Tony said it was important people understand that if we lost a vote on Clause 4, he would have to quit as leader.
There was resentment of Blair's methods from within the party, not least from Claire Short, who'd be a thorn in his side for the next 10 years. Campbell was never a fan.
Claire called in her usual fount-of-all-wisdom way and said there was a malfunction around Tony and the Parliamentary Labour Party, and the unions were up in arms. She said she liked Tony, but trust was running out. She thought Gordon was tortured and Robin was a clever egomaniac. I wondered if she ever applied to herself the kind of rigorous analysis she'd subjected the others to.
The unions, too, were bitterly divided on whether to back Blair's plan to scrap Clause 4. Dyed-in-the-wool traditionalists regarded him as a traitor.
There are those who do feel abandoned, those unable to leap so nimbly from policy vehicle to vehicle, who try desperately, in fact, to keep sight of the taillights of the modernising juggernaut.
On the day the unions cast their vote on Clause 4, and moments before Blair made his final pitch to them, he heard that the giant Transport and General Workers Union was recommending opposition.
This produced the inevitable tirade. These people are criminally stupid. They simply do not care if we win or lose.
I did not come into this Labour Party to join a pressure group. I didn't become leader of this party to lead a protest movement. Power without principle is barren, but principle without power is futile. This is a party of government, or it is nothing, and I will lead it as a party of government.
It was a defining moment in the new Labour project.
The plan after the result was for TB to make a short, unscheduled speech, and he and I went to the toilet at the back to get away from all the fussing, and we went over a few lines. He was quite emotional. He'd always believed that doing this would be an important precondition for winning over the kind of people whose support we needed. He'd done really well, and I said so. And he says to me, I think we're on our way.
For the new Clause 4, 65.23% against 34.77%.
An emotional Mr. Blair showed his relief.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think the country will say thank you too.
Just a few days later, the Blairs met Princess Diana at a private dinner. She told them she'd like to meet Campbell. He was waiting with the car and driver outside. He was completely dazzled by her.
TB is tapping at the window and says there's someone here who wants to meet you. And there she is, walking towards me. And she says, there he is. Can I come over and say hello? And then she's standing there, absolutely, spellbindingly, drop-dead gorgeous, in a way that the millions of photos didn't quite get. She said hello, held out her hand and said she was really pleased to meet me. So I mumbled something back about me being more pleased and how I didn't expect when I left the house tonight that I'd end up standing in the middle of the road talking to her. It would make a very funny picture if there were any paparazzi in those trees, she said. There was something about her eyes that went beyond radiance. They locked onto you, were utterly mesmeric. She had perfect skin and a whole face lit up when she spoke, and there were moments when I had to fight to hear the words because I'm just lost in the beauty. Anyway, she said, I mustn't hold you back any longer. And there's me thinking I would happily be held back for a long time to come. I was milking it for all it was worth and telling Tony he really shouldn't feel jealous. She probably quite liked him too.
Both Blair and Campbell were captivated by the beautiful princess.
I spent much of the day winding him up about her desire to meet me. Tony said her interest in me was about media manipulation. No need to be jealous, I said.
Diana asked a friend to invite the Blairs and the Campbells to a dinner party, which was eventually arranged despite Blair's serious misgivings.
Fiona was resigned to me behaving like a teenager, and Tony was in a very jumpy mood on the way, really worried that it would get out. It was a very ordinary house in an ordinary street in Hackney, and I was confident nobody saw him arrive. She was already there, and looking more beautiful than ever. TB couldn't work out whether to flirt with her or treat her like he would a visiting dignitary. He wasn't comfortable. She was a curious mix of fun and insecurity. Her self-obsession came through too. She said to TB at one point, "You have to touch people in pictures. They can take a lot from you, but they can never take away the pictures." Cherie later asked if she liked Philip, and she said no. Fiona and Cherie felt she was tragic, laughing one moment, her face a picture of sadness later.
Diana told her friend she'd like to have another dinner with them, and she also wanted to help New Labour.
I said to Fiona, "What do you think she's after?" "You," she said.
Back in the early days, when Campbell has been in the job less than a year, he felt it had taken over his life in the way Fiona had warned it would.
The rowing with Fiona was getting both of us down, and I was trying to work out ways of cutting the workload. I was really depressed, the full-blown stomach empty but for a knot in the middle, and the mind feeling numb and unable to get out of first gear. I was at a loss how to improve things with Fiona. She said the job had totally taken over our lives. She said I didn't listen to anyone now. I just did what I thought I had to do. Tony said he totally understood. Cherie complained he used up all his emotional energy in the job, and she needed support and he was too drained to give it.
Blair's resources are spent pushing New Labour's agenda. The Transport and General Workers' Union invite him to speak to them and then publish a list of conditions for their support.
I believe that the trade unions who were present at the birth of the Labour Party has a right to be a partner of equal, not a dominant partner, but a partner of equals. That's all we ask.
Tony was raging about it. These people are stupid and they're malevolent. They beg me to go to their conference and then they stitch me up. I have no option but to go up there and blow them out of the water. I'm finished with these people, absolutely finished with them.
Determined to keep the trade unions at arm's length, Tony Blair's welcome to Blackpool was at best cool.
Tony, welcome.
Blair rewrote his speech to make absolutely clear that the old rules no longer applied.
Demands were made, Labour responded, negotiated. Those days are over. They are gone, and they're not coming back. Today, what is important is that, of course, trade unions are listened to. So should employers be listened to. But neither will have an arm lock on Labour or its policies.
It was probably the toughest message a party leader had given to the unions, and they just about took it.
But the clearest signal that Blair is now regarded as a political force to be reckoned with came from the White House. Clinton treated him as though he was already Prime Minister.
Tony was more nervous than I've seen him in a long time. Clinton was just inside the door, putting people at ease. The first question from the UK press was to the President. Did he think he was sitting with the next Prime Minister? There was a pause. Both smiled, and you could feel Clinton's mind whirring.
I only hope he's talking to the next American president.
However, Clinton's second election victory is given second billing by the British press. The Financial Times reports that Blair has changed his hairstyle.
The phone went early, and I knew it would be Tony, and I knew it would be about his hair. I said we just had to make light of it. But it was one of those stories with the power to connect and damage. He and Cherie were due to visit Great Ormond Street Hospital. I went over there and he was seething. He said all anyone will want to ask me about is my hair. I just cannot believe the Financial Times can run a story like that.
What about your hairstyle, Mr. Blair?
Yes, I don't think I've ever heard such nonsense.
Tony agreed to a quote, saying his problem was not changing his hair, but keeping it, which by my reckoning was his first admission that he was beginning to lose it.
Even though some people suspected that Robin Cook was having a relationship with his secretary, the affair remained secret while Labour was in opposition.
Neil and Glenys came round and we went to the Camden Brasserie. To our and their amazement, Robin and Gaynor were 2 tables away. Robin went a weird pink colour, while Gaynor looked sick. Robin came over. There was something I needed to fax to him, and could I fax it to his office? It was probably a big charade to pretend he wasn't going to her place.
When Labour comes to power, however, the affair becomes big news and Cook's marriage publicly implodes.
Back there, yes, indeed.
Blair presents New Labour as a party in tune with popular culture. For the final conference before the '97 election, he adapts the World Cup anthem as his rallying call.
I also learned second-hand that Gordon had done a Labour's Coming Home section in his speech for Monday. It was a bit of a coincidence that within a day of them seeing a full draft of Tony's speech, we then hear that. I said I saw our Labour's Coming Home section as possibly the single most important passage for the tabloids, and there was no way GB could preempt it. I could tell we were in for a battle over it. Still arguing with Gordon over Labour's Coming Home, but he said he was really pissed off about it. Eventually he reluctantly agreed and made clear we owed him one.
Brown stuck to the economy, promising a redistribution of wealth to get people off benefits and back to work.
The Labour Treasury will levy a windfall tax on the privatised utility to pay for immediate action on jobs. Investment in jobs today so that we can cut social security bills tomorrow.
Delegates gave him a standing ovation, which unnerves Blair. His crucial address to conference is the following day.
He suddenly said he wasn't happy with the speech. and we would have to start from scratch. Oh, don't be so ridiculous. He tore off his clothes, got himself a dressing gown and sat on the sofa. I said the speech was fine. I'll have to do it myself, he said. Leave me now and I'll call you when I've done it. One year we'll get a decent speech without all this nonsense. He called us in at 2:30. He hadn't changed that much.
At 6 in the morning, they went over the speech again.
I could tell Tony was emotional, so was I. I felt emotionally drained and went to my room, sat down and started crying. Fiona came in and was worried something terrible had happened. I said, it's fine, I'm just totally drained. A lot hung on the speech and it really had to be good.
It had to have the power to reach voters, to go beyond personal animosity and the battle between old and new Labour.
Forget the past. No more bosses versus workers. We are on the same side, the same team, and Britain United will win.
Tony started slowly, and I was trying to work out whether people would be able to spot how nervous he was.
Labour has come home to you, so come home to us. Labour's coming home. 17 years of hurt never stopped us dreaming. Labour's coming home.
Labour's coming home got such a good reception, better than I thought it would. As a performance, it went down a storm.
By the end of the week, the party was brimming with excitement, pumped up and confident that with Blair in charge, they had a chance for power.
After all the speculation, at last the Prime Minister went to the palace and set in train the longest election campaign for 70 years.
TB asked if I thought we would win. I said I did. So did he, but he felt 6 weeks was a long time, and he worried about the quality of the shadow cabinet and their capacity for making mistakes. He felt tax and spend remained a problem.
Blair also worries that Labour is leading by too much in the opinion polls.
I got round to TB's early, and he said the big problem was underdoggery. We were felt to be so far ahead that the press would want to hit us hard. He said, I can't tell you how much my stomach churns when I think we've got 6 weeks of this. I barely slept last night. I've also been racking my brains for any skeletons that might still be clanking around.
And 6 weeks on the campaign bus appeals to none of them.
The windows were tinted and covered in slogans, and the seats were a kind of dog-shit brown. The atmosphere inside was really dingy. The thought of spending weeks on here was not a happy one, and Tony felt exactly the same. He said, I know we have to do a bus tour, but do we have to be on the bus to do it? I emphasised that we would have a raised platform that came out of the bus, and TB would be doing lots of impromptu speeches. For want of a better phrase, I called it the People's Platform. What a lot of bollocks.
A month on the road and Labour is still way out in front, though Blair is nervous.
Tony said there has never been a general election in which the focus is so much on one person. He said this election, when you boil it down, is all about me and whether I'm fit to be Prime Minister. It's kind of scary at times.
For me, New Labour is not some public relations gimmick or some salesman's patter. New Labour is what I believe.
Days before the election, Blair reveals he plans to ask Lib Dem leader Paddy Ashdown to join his government.
How would people feel if I gave Paddy a place in the cabinet and started merger talks? F me. I loved the boldness of it, but doubted he could get it through the key players. He was making a cup of tea and chuckling. We could put the Tories out of business for a generation.
Campbell was right. Neither leader was able to get it past their parties, and it remained a gleam in Blair's eye.
Whose idea was this?
Last day of campaigning, and the focus is now on the ballot box and what happens the day after tomorrow.
Well, I shall be, as you say, looking forward to the results, I think. That's the,
Will there be a sense of anticipation?
I think it would be odd if there wasn't the mildest sense of anticipation, yes. I think that's... you know, I think that would not be overstating it, and...
I said to Tony I thought we came over as a bit cocky and in the bag, and he said it was hard not to be jocular today because it would have been po-faced not to have been a bit more up than usual.
The pundits may have written this election off and said it's all over. The media may say that, the Tories may have given up, but I tell you, this election is not over until it is over, and we want every bit of support in this country for tomorrow's election. Every single bit.
The final hours were spent in Blair's constituency.
I called home and spoke to the kids, and I could tell the boys had a big sense of what was going on. Callum said, "Are we definitely going to win?" I loved the we. I said, "Yes, I think so, and we might win big." After I put the phone down, I sat on the bed, put my head in my hands and cried my eyes out. I don't know what it was. Relief it was over, letting go of the nervous energy, pride, bit of fear. Cherie said she wanted the kids to go with them to vote, which was great, but getting everyone ready was all a bit stressy, like going to a wedding or something. But they looked good walking across the field at the back of the house to the polling station.
But they were also experiencing a sense of unreality on the day of the vote.
It was a weird feeling. It was as if we'd been fighting a 15-round fight, and as the bell rang for the last round, the other guy just didn't show. I started to get word of the early exit polls during the afternoon, and it looked like it was going to be big. TB didn't believe the figures, and nor did I. It wasn't until we got the call from number 10 later saying John Major wanted to speak to him that we dared to believe it for sure. There was a TV in the bar, and we stood together at one point as more and more Tories were falling. "What on earth have we done?" TB said. "This is unbelievable." Even that didn't lift me out of my flat mood though. Fiona asked what was wrong. I said it was probably the anticlimax and worries about the future.
But even at this stage, nothing is taken for granted. Campbell is almost superstitious in his refusal to celebrate what is clearly a huge success for New Labour.
On it goes. Look at those blue seats turning red. They go on and...
Tony was meant to be doing some interviews, but he said he didn't want to. I did them instead and wished I hadn't.
Alastair, you've won, haven't you?
Well, Mr. Blair's constituency is not yet declared, but I think we're having a pretty good night.
I mean, there's Peter Snow saying possible majority of 171.
Well, I would doubt that, but I think it's fair to say we've had a very good campaign and we're having a very good night.
Well, I mean, 171 is a bit more than.
Well, I would doubt we get a majority of 171, but it's quite clear we've had a very good night.
The sense of unreality shared by Blair and Campbell persists, even though they're on the plane and heading for the victory party at the Royal Festival Hall.
There were bottles of champagne there, but TB was still not really in celebratory mood. Just after takeoff, he and Cherie had a very private chat across their little table. This was him telling her how important she had been, and her saying how proud she was, what a great Prime Minister he would be, she would always support him, etc. Portillo lost while we were in the air. Seats were falling that we would never have imagined standing a hope in hell of winning. I would get the result, tell the rest, and TB would say, "You're kidding me." I realised when we arrived at the festival hall, his speech was in my pocket, and jumped out while the car was still moving. It ran over my foot. There was a great carnival atmosphere, thousands of people, hundreds of journalists. TB worked the crowd, then up to the lectern, and a new dawn, and they cheered every word.
Thank you. Well, a new dawn has broken, has it not? And it is wonderful. We always said that if we had the courage to change, then we could do it, and we did it.
We had been really flagging, but he was in great form now. It was weird. I felt deflated. All around us, people were close to delirium, but I didn't feel part of it. I wanted to get to a quieter place. Maybe it was too big to take in. More likely was that while the crowd were focusing on now, we were thinking about the job ahead.
After an hour's sleep, they were all straight back into the fray.
The whole journey with TB was fantastic. People coming out of houses to wave and cheer, but it was clear expectations were going to be way too high. I had a huge surge of emotion, and as we turned into Whitehall, we could hear the crowds. The cars stopped at the bottom of the street, and we got out, and the noise was deafening. Tony and Cherie got out, started the walk up. It was brilliant. We got to the top, and I felt a mix of confidence, but uncertainty too.
Whitehall mandarins realised after the first few days that New Labour didn't bear much resemblance to other governments they'd seen come and go.
The Cabinet Secretary, Sir Robin Butler, said he didn't think I should attend Cabinet. I did a little note to Tony, saying if we were to get clarity of briefing out of Cabinet, I had to be there. He said in writing there was no question of me not attending Cabinet meetings.
Blair has the bit between his teeth at once. He supported Tory efforts to end sectarian violence in Northern Ireland and now believes he can make the leap to a lasting peace.
Tony said he reckoned he could see a way of sorting the Northern Ireland problem. I loved the way he said it, like no one had ever thought of it before. I said, "What makes you think you can do it when no one else could?"
Tony Blair in
position always intended to make Northern Ireland the first place he would visit officially as Prime Minister. Its problems, he says...
Just over 2 weeks at number 10, and Blair flies to Ulster to unveil his plan.
We want peace and a lasting and decent settlement for people here in Northern Ireland.
The tone of what we prepared was heavily weighted in favour of the Unionists, but what we were actually proposing was that Sinn Féin would come into talks without a ceasefire. The Unionists would go mad at that. There was a lot of sophisticated spinning to be done. I called Dennis Murray at the BBC and briefed him. Bloody hell, he said. Tony and Mo did a walkabout, and he said these people are desperate for something good to happen.
And to make sure there is no danger of misunderstanding, I am prepared to allow officials to meet Sinn Féin, provided events on the ground, here and elsewhere, do not make that impossible.
It was a very rural, very Ulster event, but he seemed to have a natural empathy. As he walked along shaking hands, Tony put his foot in an enormous cowpat but just carried on till we got to the car. I said what a glamorous life I lead, sitting alongside the Prime Minister as he cleans bullshit off his shoes.
Blair was now in a position to repay favours, not least to President Clinton, whose official visit to Britain will now include a session with the Cabinet at number 10.
In truth, we were getting such a good press at the moment that the Americans stood to gain far more than we did, especially as Bill Clinton was being done in by the Paula Jones sexual harassment case again. The car pulled up. It was a lovely sunny day. There were hundreds of photographers there. Tony was nervous, fussing about tiny details like where on the step to stand when he arrived. Should he kiss Hillary? We decided not. Whether he and Bill should stand in the middle or put the wives in the middle. He was talking very quickly, a sure sign of nerves.
And the President admits to Cabinet that he has no advice to offer.
They're doing very well. I'd like to have a 179-seat majority. I'm not going to give any advice. I'm going to sit here and take it.
A year after they were seen out together, Robin Cook and his secretary Gaynor Regan are about to be outed over their affair by the news of the world.
I went back to see Tony and said, I bring you your first sex scandal. He said, what are the chances of persuading them not to run it? I said somewhere between 0 and 5%. The chances of it not being run somewhere were closer to the 0 end. TB was clearly a bit thrown by this one. He hated this personal stuff. It was why he was always so loath to get involved in Tory sleaze stories. What the hell do I do about this, he said. We talked it round and round. Maybe Robin would make our minds up for us. Maybe he would want to go. I doubted it. So did Tony.
The Foreign Secretary was on his way to Heathrow, about to go on holiday with his wife.
I spoke to Robin on his mobile and asked if he was alone. He said, no, I'm with Margaret. I said a bad story was about to break. Is it about me, he asked. He said, you speak, I'll listen. I suspected he knew it was Gaynor. I went through the dates, and he said, I can see how that could be a problem. I was, I must say, quite impressed at how cool he was, with his wife sitting next to him. He asked for advice, and I said the key was clarity.
Cook was then cut off, and when he called back, the mood had changed.
He told Margaret, and he sounded very emotional. I said, I really feel for you. He cancelled his holiday and was coming back into London. He said, I can't leave Gaynor to face 2 weeks of hell alone, and I took that as a clear signal he was leaving Margaret. I said he had been very unlucky. No, Alastair, he said very firmly, I have been incredibly foolish, but Gaynor is my future.
I can confirm that I am leaving my wife. I want to make it clear that the responsibility for this is entirely mine. Margaret and I now hope to restructure our own lives. I will have nothing further to add to this statement, and none of those involved wish to make any comment.
TB said maybe it is possible to love two people at the same time. Oh yeah, I said, and Cherie would accept that, would she? What would Fiona do if it was me, I said. He said. Chew your balls off, kill you probably. Cherie would be the same.
But back in the summer of '97, this cast barely a shadow on the government's popularity. Blair, just back from his own summer break, was enjoying a prolonged honeymoon with the public.
Hello there. You okay? You got very wet out here, have you? Sorry about that. I'm nervous. I'm going to get back to work, I think.
And in just a few days, people in their tens of thousands will turn to him for support and comfort in a period of national grief.
At around 2, I was paged. Car crash in Paris, Dodie killed, Diana hurt. This is not a joke. Then TB came on. He was really shocked. He said she was in a coma and the chances are she'd die. I don't think I'd ever heard him like this, full of pauses and then gabbling a little, but equally clear what we had to do. We talked through what we'd have to do if she died. Then Nick Matthews, the duty clerk, called and said simply, "She's dead. The Prime Minister is being told now." I went through on the call. "I can't believe this. I just can't believe it," said Tony. "You just can't take it in, can you?" And yet, as ever with Tony, he was straight on to the ramifications. By the end of the call, we had sorted all we had to do practically. He thought he should probably speak to the Queen and Charles. "Those poor boys," he said. He'd been working on the words for his doorstep and was going over some lines he'd drafted. We agreed it was fine to be emotional and to call her the People's Princess. It was also going to be a test for him, the first time in which the country had looked to him in a moment of shock and grief. We talked about the last time they met at Chequers and the letters she sent afterwards. She was a real asset, TB said, a big part of New Britain. But somehow he said he knew it would end like this, before her time. Tony said, "I'm Labour and want to change things." They believe things should pretty much stay the same. We were looking shifty and shabby. It was a disaster. Tony said, "Here you are, Leo. Talk to your spin doctor." We were kidding ourselves if we thought it was a good campaign. Tony said we simply had to hold our nerve and our balls of steel.
And that's all here on BBC Two. Tomorrow at 8. Next tonight, epic drama Rome here on BBC Two. And over on BBC One, an emotional journey for Nicky Campbell, discovering why his adoptive dad was such a good father. Who do you think you are? Next.